Good morning. If you don't have a Bible, you should probably get one. We're going to be zooming through it for the entirety of the sermon, so that's important. Also, didn't Noah and the band do a great job this morning? Give them a round of applause. It is important for us to be raising up leaders here at North Orange, and so if you see Noah and the band in the middle of the services, just in between services, congratulate them, tell them they're doing a great job, because we want to empower more leaders. If you don't know, I was doing youth ministry for about 15 years before I started my senior ministry here at North Orange. And in 15 years of youth ministry, I learned a lot. Not knew a lot, learned a lot. Because a lot of it I had to learn through mistakes and experiences. And so one of the things that we did a lot in youth ministry was mission trips. And I'd taken my intern and I and most of the church staff had gone to Taiwan on a mission trip, and we'd done ministry in a reform school and a church. I'd done tons of Mexico mission trips where we served in churches, and we fed and we built churches and homes and such. One of the most important things that you learn on the mission field is to be flexible. How many of you have ever been on a mission trip? Everything goes exactly according to plan on mission trips, correct? No. In fact, our mission trip when I was working in the Bay Area was to Mexicali, and we didn't even call it the Mexicali trip. We called it the Flexicali trip because you need to be flexible, because things don't always go according to plan. Do you believe that? So what do you do when things don't go according to plan? Plan B, plan on the fly, compromise, right? You figure something out. Compromise is important, would you agree? Have you ever made one? Relationships are about compromise, right? My way or the highway relationships don't usually make it, right? It's just kind of hard to live with a person like that. And so compromise is a big deal. Hear this quote from, this guy's name's cool. Hear this quote from the European Parliament member in the 1700s named Edmund Burke. Seriously, that's his name. All government, indeed every human benefit and enjoyment, every virtue and every prudent act is founded on compromise and barter. Life is full of compromises, right? You got to be able to make decisions on the fly. But can you ever go too far? What don't you compromise? We're going to look at that today in 1 Samuel. We've been reading through 1 Samuel. This is the story of the monarchy in Israel, and they've gone from judges to a king. And the king's name is Saul. And turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 13, and we'll take off with Saul's story. 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. Verse 1 basically says that Saul was 30 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 42 years over Israel. Pretty good reign, right? Pretty good reign. It's basically just summarizing his reign. And then here it tells you a little bit about his army. Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel, of which 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash. I didn't make the name of that city up. Michmash is the real name of the city. In fact, I've got maps to show you. See? You got a magnifying glass, you can see. Okay, this is important. This is going to tell you about the battle that's taking place. These are real cities, 5 to 20 miles apart. They're not huge, but they had to walk, chariot, horses everywhere. Okay, so Saul's got an army, right? Verse 5 here. Now the Philistines assembled to fight with Israel. I'm in chapter 13, verse 5. 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people like the sand which is on the seashore in abundance. And they came up and camped at Michmash. Is that good news? 3,000 against 30,000 plus 6,000. Now, some translations change the 30,000 to 3,000. But assume, even if it's 3,000, 2 soldiers per chariot, right? And 6,000 horsemen. So that's still 12,000 soldiers against 3,000 soldiers. Who's going to win that battle? It's going to be a hard battle to win. Battles are fought with numbers, and the Philistines have the numbers. And so Israel's outnumbered. But let's keep going here, because not only are they outnumbered, there's more going on here. Verse 6, chapter 13, verse 6. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were hard-pressed, then the people hid themselves in caves, in thickets, in cliffs, and in pits. Also, some of the Hebrews crossed the Jordan into the land of Gad and Gilead, but as for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him. Confident? Trembling. Do you tremble with confidence? No, they're afraid. Why? There is a battle coming. There are soldiers that outnumber them, and they've camped on the outskirts of them. When you bring an army to the border, you are coming for war. And what happened was a lot of the Israel soldiers hid in caves. Why? Because they don't want to die. Right? Do you blame them? This is a battle that they're going to lose. Have you ever been up against it? Any of you? The clock, the time. Like maybe it's a work deadline, and there's no way you're going to get everything done. So what do? Just as much as you can, right? Some of you quit. Anybody quit? Maybe it's a school deadline for the younger, right? And you don't have enough time to do what needs to be done. What are you going to do? More importantly, what does it feel like to know that you're going to do your best and still be defeated? That's why they hid. So here we go. It gets better. No, it doesn't. It gets worse. Verse 8. Now he, this is Saul, waited 7 days. This is chapter 13, verse 8. Now he waited 7 days according to the appointed time set by Samuel, who's the prophet, remember. But Samuel didn't come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So what happened was, in chapter 10, Saul and Samuel, they set the standards for how this is going to work. Samuel's the prophet, Saul's the king. They've never had a king before. So if you remember, Samuel, chapter 10, verse 25 says, these are the institutes that have to take place. He wrote them in a book, okay? It's like a law. Now, one of the things he said, not then, but one of the things he said was that he was the one who was going to come in 7 days and do a sacrifice for Saul and his army, letting them know that God would be with them in battle. If you're outnumbered in battle, it's bad, right? If you're outnumbered in battle, but God's with you, it's good, right? And so, when the 7 days passed, the army, what was left of it that wasn't hiding in caves, started to scatter. So what's Saul going to do? He's a leader. He's a king. He finally got the confidence. He responded to God's call. What would you do? This sacrifice has to be made. My soldiers need to know that God is with us. What's going to happen here? I'm just going to do it myself. I'm the king. I've been appointed this role. Let's keep going here. Verse 9. So Saul said, bring to me the burnt offering and the peace offering. And he, Saul, offered the burnt offering. Okay, I did it. I did what needed to be done. I was flexible. He wasn't here. I didn't want to lose any more soldiers. I did what needed to be done. How many of you blame him? How many of you would have done what he did in that instance? Okay, me and you guys are telling the truth. Okay. So, verse 10 here. As soon as he finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. Why did Samuel come exactly after he was done with the burnt offering? Because, of course, he came right after it was done, right? That's just how that works, right? There's no biblical answer to that. It's just, of course. That's all I got to say. Of course. As soon as he does it, of course. And what Saul does here is he meets them outside. It's almost like the babysitter who goes, before you go in the house, let me tell you what your kids did in here. Did you have crayon all over the wall when you left for dinner? Okay, no. Okay, so let me tell you. So that's what Saul's doing. Watch this. Verse 11. Verse 10. As soon as he finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came out, and Saul went out to meet him and greet him. But Samuel said, what have you done? Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattering from me, and you didn't come with the appointed days. Are those valid? People are leaving, and you didn't come, right? You didn't come with the appointed days. And the Philistines are assembling at Michmash. We got an army coming to us. Therefore now, I said, now the Philistines will come down against us, and I have not asked the favor of the Lord, so I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. I made a leadership call. You didn't come. My army's leaving. The army is bearing down on us. I made a leadership call. Samuel said to Saul, you acted foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord. Have you ever got in trouble for doing the right thing? Yeah, it happens, right? Like, I did this. Boss is going to be happy with that. I made a call, and then you get in there, and the boss is like, what are you doing? I had something in place, and you did what you thought was right, but you did the wrong thing. That's how that goes. What was Saul supposed to do? They were taking action against him. He's a leader. He's a king. He's finally confident. What was he supposed to do? Well, apparently he wasn't supposed to do that, because in verse 13, Samuel says, you acted foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. Let me tell you about the commandment. In chapter 10, verse 25, there were standards. You're the king now. I'm the prophet. As the kids say, stay in your lane. Right? Stay in your lane. And when the king did the offering, he overstepped. How many of us have ever overstepped? All the time. All the time. What should the penalty be for that? This one's a little steep. Verse 14. This is what happens because he overstepped. Now your kingdom shall not endure. The Lord has sought out for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord appointed him ruler over his people. How many of you would like to think you're doing the right thing, hear somebody, not even a prophet, somebody say, you did the wrong thing, and not only that, I'm going to replace you with someone who's better than you? Ouch. Ouch. Put yourself in Saul's shoes. Is this fair? Keep reading. And the Lord has appointed him ruler over his people. I'm still in verse 14 here at the end. Because you have not kept what the Lord commanded. So his kingdom is going to be over. That's the penalty. Saul, new appointed king. The way that kings work is your children take up the monarchy. And now it's over. Because what? Because you made a decision of leadership in the midst of battle, of war? Is that fair? That's harsh. It's harsh to say the least, right? So what happens next? Well, we hear about his son, Jonathan. Let's move on. So in chapter 15 through 18, I'm not going to go through it. You guys can read it later. It's the army's on the move. The Philistine army is not waiting for them to figure this out. Right? They're not waiting for you guys to figure out your politics. They're on the move. And they'd split into three groups, and they're besieging. They're on the outskirts, though. They haven't started the war yet. Verse 19, because it gets worse. Now no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, otherwise, Hebrews will make swords or spears. Kind of smart from the Philistines to not allow a blacksmith in Israel. So all Israel went down to the Philistines, each to sharpen his plowshare, his mattock, his ox, and his hoe. And they overcharged them for it in verse 21. So they go to the enemy's blacksmiths to sharpen their gardening tools for war that's at least 3-1, and it could be 12-1. Depending on who's in the caves and who's fighting. It's bad. It's bad. But some people have swords and spears. Verse 22, and you'll find out it's not very many. Verse 22, so it came on that day, that battle, that neither sword nor spear was found in the hands of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and his son Jonathan. 2 people have battle weapons, and the Philistines have all the weapons. It's Saul and his son, and the rest of the Israel army is out there with gardening tools that they had to pay the enemy to sharpen, and they were overcharged for it. And they're outnumbered. Is this going to go well? This sounds bad. Okay. So you have, number 1, you have a superior army heading in your direction. Okay? Number 2, your army is hiding in caves. Number 3, the Philistines have superior weapons, like they've got swords, they've got spears. The only people with a sword and a spear are 2, the king and his son. And you've made the prophet upset, and you've made God upset by not conducting the sacrifice the way it's supposed to be. How is this battle going to go? It's not good. Let's read, though. Because in 14, we hear about Jonathan, the son of Saul. Now the day came, chapter 1, that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who was carrying his armor bearer now. So there's two people, Jonathan, his armor bearer. He said, "Come, let us cross over to the Philistines' garrison that's on the other side." But he didn't tell his father. Is that a smart thing to do? Is it a brave thing to do? I'll give him brave. Okay. Saul was staying in the outskirts. Okay, well, let's go to verse 4 here. 14:4. Between the passes by which Jonathan sought to cross over to the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp crag on the one side and a sharp crag on the other side. And the name of one was Bozez and the name of the other Seneh. And one crag rose on the north opposite Michmash and the other on the south opposite Geba. So the Philistines are encamped with cliffs around them, and they're not worried. Number one, the army is in caves. Number two, they have gardening weapons, and they're fighting amongst themselves, the leaders. They're not worried, and you got to be crazy to come up you'd have to climb up a mountain, climb up a mountain to get to them. So they're safe. Then Jonathan said, verse 6, to the young man who was carrying his armor, "Come, let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few." He's saying these people who don't have the covenant, don't show that they follow Yahweh, they don't have faith in God, let's cross over and let's engage them in battle. Because God doesn't need an army. He's got you and me. Courageous? Faith? Maybe he could have taught his father a thing, because his father was scared of losing an army. His armor bearer said to him, verse 7, "Do all that is in your heart, turn yourself, and here I am with you according to your desire." I mean, that's a brave armor bearer, right? I want to know his name. Then Jonathan said, "Behold, we will cross over to the men and reveal ourselves to them. If they say to us, 'Wait, we will come up to you,' then we'll stay in our place and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hands, and this shall be a sign to us." A sign to us. Have you ever heard of a sign like that before? Ever heard of a guy named Gideon? Are we supposed to do that? I don't know. Talk about it in your small groups. Verse 11. When both of them revealed themselves to the garrison, so they're not hiding, they're showing themselves to the Philistines, they said, the Philistines said, "Behold, Hebrews are coming out of their holes where they have hidden themselves." This is a derogatory term. They're calling them animals and dogs, right? Cowards. "Behold, they've come out, and they're going to fight us now with these two." So the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan, "Come over, come up to us, and we'll tell you something." Which means what? Come get some, right? Come get some. And Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel." Is it brave? Is it a show of faith? Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet with his armor bearer behind them. And they, the Philistine army, fell before Jonathan and his armor bearer, put some to death. That first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men, with about half a furrow an acre of land. Jonathan and his armor bearer, nothing but courage and the confidence that God was with them, took out a small encampment of 20 Philistine soldiers. Amazing, right? Amazing. But that's not where it ends, because something else happens. Verse 15. "And there was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. Even the garrison and raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it became a great trembling." So you know what happened? Jonathan takes out 20. God meets him in battle and does what? An earthquake. He does an earthquake. And if you read through, I'm not going to read through it so you guys can do it. 16 and on, what happens is the Philistines get confused. They start fighting themselves, right? And the earthquake makes them run in defeat. The Israelites come up out of their caves, chase them away, like they get brave, right? Which is good. They get brave. All because this is what happened. Why did the Philistines run? They had the numbers, they had the weapons. The earthquake signified that the Philistine idol and God wasn't with them in battle. They were going to lose that battle, and they knew it. But Jonathan, with one extra person, dispersed this entire battle in the battlefield. Why? Because he believed. So now the question is, why share this portion in this place? Why share Jonathan's story after Saul's sin? What is the results of Saul's sin? Do you remember? Saul's compromise, not following the commandment of God, meant that his lineage in the monarchy was done. What kind of king would Jonathan have been? Awesome. Jonathan had all the tools to be an amazing king. And Saul is put to shame. Because this is put here so that he knows that because of his sin, his son and his grandkids wouldn't be the kings that they could have been. Jonathan dispersed an army of at least 12,000 with his executive assistant by his side, right? And God. And Saul's mistake cost him that man being king. You know what that's like? My son used to tell me, I want to be a pastor like you when I grow up. He doesn't say that anymore. Now he doesn't want to do it. You know why? He told me straight up. He said, I don't want to do it anymore because I see how much work you have to do. Smart kid. But he used to want to be a pastor. So imagine North Orange said, Edmund, we're hiring you, and as long as you obey and do the right thing, your children will become ministers in the church. And my son gets this opportunity that he's wanted. And let's say one day I lose my cool, start a fight, get arrested, and I get fired from the church. And let's say that same week, as the elders are figuring out how to deal with me, I sit in the back pew and my son stands up here and delivers the greatest sermon that I've ever heard. And then he goes with the high school kids to camp. He's older now. He goes with the high school kids to camp and leads them through an amazing week. And I see in him the amazing potential and the leadership ability that I ruined because of my sin. Imagine the shame that I'm feeling in my heart. That's what Saul is feeling because he ruined it for his kid. But what did he do? What was so bad about the offering? It's a compromise. Many of us said we would do it, right? Are you with me, or are we still we're just leaving Saul now? We were there. We're in Saul's shoes. What was so bad about it? His true offense wasn't doing the sacrifice. That was the letter of the law. But his true offense was fearing that God would not do what God said he would do. You guys follow me? I'm losing my army. I mean, they're hiding. Dave, I need to do something because you're not going to come through, God. Your prophet hasn't come through at the right time. I've got to act or I'm going to lose. When Jonathan knew, I don't care what army I have. I've got God. But Saul didn't believe that God would come through. And that's why he lost his empire. And that's why he lost his monarchy. And the example of Jonathan is a judgment on him. And anybody who was reading this at that time would have known. Because when we don't believe, when we fall short of believing the faithfulness of God, there's repercussions. So my question for you is, do you doubt God's faithfulness? Do you put yourself in Saul's shoes and doubt God's faithfulness sometimes? And how are you and I sabotaging God's plans for us because we're afraid he's not coming? What are you doing? Everyone does it. In Genesis 15, God has a conversation with an old Abraham. His wife is barren, but he says, Abraham, I'm going to give you a son. And your son is going to be the descendant of many generations. He's going to be the catalyst of my people. And Abraham believes God. I've got a barren wife. I'm old, right? About 75, 80 years old. I'm going to have a son. About 10 years pass. No son. So what does his wife say to him? What does his wife say to him in Genesis 16:2? You don't have to turn to it, but she says this: we don't have a kid yet. God hasn't done what he said he's going to do, so let's compromise. Here's plan B. So Sarah said to Abraham, behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my maid, and perhaps I will obtain a child through her. And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. It wasn't uncommon to do this back in that time for barren people. But what happened? They made the compromise. And almost as soon as they did that, Genesis 17 happens, and God came through with a child for Abraham. So now Abraham had the first child through his maid and the compromise, and then the child that God delivered. And they would be a judgment on each other in perpetuity. Because Abraham and Sarah didn't believe that God was going to come through and be who he said he was and do what he said he was going to do. Everyone does it. So what are you doing to compromise? What am I doing to compromise? Do we believe that God is going to come through and do what he said he's going to do? So here's the only point. This is the point. Do not compromise. God is faithful. God will do what he said he will do. And you and I are like Saul. You and I are like Abraham and Sarah. And that's why this was published here, so that we would learn from their mistakes. It's not about the compromise. Do you get it? But when we compromise, we don't trust God's faithfulness. Do you trust God's faithfulness? How many of you are waiting on God to show up? Has it been 7 days? And how many of you want to take matters into your own hands? Make the leadership decision. Something's got to be done. God's not going to show up. Well, this is my encouragement to you. Hold out a little longer. In both of those instances, in Saul's instance, as soon as he made the sacrifice, if he would have just held out, believed God's faithfulness. If Abraham would have just held out, believed God's faithfulness, if you would just hold on and believe God's faithfulness, then you won't doubt God's faithfulness and you won't lose the blessing. In Saul's case, it was the lineage, his legacy. His son would have been an amazing king. We would have been reading stories about Jonathan the king. If you just hold out. And God should come when he says he's going to come, right? He should have come right away. God is always on time. He comes at the exact perfect moment to stretch your faith as far as it needs to be stretched. So my encouragement to you is hold out a little longer. How many of us need to hear that today? To hold out a little longer. God's going to come at the right time. So are you thinking about cheating or stealing to make your rent payment because you don't think that God is coming through? Hold out a little longer. Are you willing to compromise your faith or your purity because you want to keep the right guy or girl in your relationship because you don't think that God is going to come through for you? Hold out a little longer. Or maybe you're thinking of hurting yourself. Or maybe you're thinking of ending it all because you think God doesn't hear your pain. I'm telling you to hold out. Hold out a little longer. Because God is faithful. And that's what this scripture teaches us today. The rest of this, from 14 on to 15, it's Saul's impulsiveness. Read it in your small group, read it in your personal time. At the end here, though, in verse 49, the sons of Saul were Jonathan and Ishvi and Malch, and the names of his two daughters were these, and the names of the firstborn Merab, and the name of Saul's wife. And there's this lineage. It's history, yes, but it's also a shame on him because he missed out, because he didn't believe that God was faithful. So don't give up on God. And don't compromise. And don't doubt God's faithfulness. Because when you start to doubt God's faithfulness, that is the beginning of the end. And that's a tragedy. And the story that we're reading about Saul is a tragedy, right? Like, this isn't a happy ending. But we're supposed to learn from it so that our story is not a tragedy. So hold on to God's faithfulness. Are you on the brink of compromise? Do you believe that God's not coming through? Is the outnumbering Philistine army at your door? Has the allotted time for God come and gone? And are you about to doubt God's faithfulness and do your own thing? Hold on. Hold on a little while longer, because God will come through. Don't make the same mistake as Saul. Don't doubt God's faithfulness. Amen? Amen.